Welcome to the Psychedelic Couch. Before we dive into today's discussion, we remind our listeners that using illicit drugs carries significant risks and legal consequences. Psychedelic substances like LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, MDMA and DMT are illegal in many countries, including the UK, and their possession or use can lead to legal penalties. Psychedelics can have profound effects on mental and physical health. While some report positive experiences, others may face negative effects like anxiety and psychosis. These substances can also interact unpredictably with medications and underlying conditions. Approach psychedelics with caution and responsibility. This podcast shares information, not encouragement or advocacy for illegal use. If you or someone you know struggles with substance abuse, seek help from healthcare professionals or local support services. In today's episode, I sit down with Matthew Bruce, a former Australian soldier turned healer in the microdosing space. Matthew opens up about his journey through PTSD, sexual dysfunction, and the lasting effects of childhood experiences on adult emotional and sexual health. We discuss the power of self-awareness, emotional regulation, and psychedelics as tools for healing. From the impact of diet on mental health to fostering healthy male sexuality for societal growth, this conversation is packed with insights on personal and community well-being. I hope you enjoy. Welcome, Matthew. Thank you so much for joining me today. I came across your articles about healing sexual function, which is obviously so relevant to the work that I do, and I thought that we really must have a conversation. So much of what you speak of resonates really strongly with the clients that I work with. So I wondered whether we could start by you telling listeners a little bit about your background, how you went from being a soldier to a healer in the microdosing space.
Amazing. Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Claire, and quick hello to the audience. I think these spaces for us to talk about psychedelics and, somatic sexology and all of these things is really exciting. So thank you. And yeah, my name's Matthew Bruce. I'm 38 years old now. I spent 10 years in the Australian military. A time of that was in the support staff member as the Special Forces. I served overseas in multiple different roles. And when I come out, I guess I was the poster child for PTSD and sympathetic nervous system overstimulation, I think you'll call it, or maybe even broke my sympathetic nervous system. And then, yeah, I guess I've been on a huge healing journey ever since, kind of leaving no stone unturned to, recall and remember all of the parts of myself to bring me back into a state of, emotional well-being, vitality, being able to sing, dance, play again, and to be able to have healthy relationships with other people, and myself, of course. And I guess a large part of that is self-pleasure and, really recorrecting some of the patterns and the conditioning that I'd learned from my childhood or in the military and some of the coping strategies I developed after the military as well too.
Yeah, okay, great. And you mentioned in one of the articles that that your experiences with sexual dysfunction track back to childhood. It wasn't just your time in Afghanistan. So I wondered if maybe you could share a little bit about those early experiences, and how family dynamics, body image, cultural messaging, that all impacts and shapes male sexuality.
Yeah, totally. I feel like for men, there kind of can be more of a dominance in our lower energy centers, where a lot of our energy is kind of in our sacral center. And we can basically be more wide to think from there, to function from there, to basically be in our primitive state of mind or be in that really fight or flight state. And I think that that's how men can really show up in life. And then for women, they're very showing up from their heart. And I think that a lot of that has to do with one, maybe it's predetermined, like it's a human experience for men to have a human experience from that way. But I feel like from some of the dynamics that we can have as children, when we close off the heart, when we don't actually have an abundance of energy up here, it can actually be a lot easier for it to shut down. Does that make sense? So women have this abundance of energy so they can stay open constantly. But for us men, it's very quite easy for us to close here. And you can see that in somatic bodies when men's shoulders are rounded forward. You can even see that in the military that, one of our main strategies that we do when we hop into the military is do push-ups, which rounds our chest forward, which actually physically closes our heart from, the fascia and all these things as well. So I think that that's probably, shaped as young men, as young boys, that our hearts are closing because we don't have an abundance of energy here. And then that goes out and has a certain cause and effect for different people in different ways.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In fact, my supervisor was talking about it yesterday about kind of go to kind of aggression or sex, these two sort of camps that men often kind of lean towards, which of course, as we know, is all connected to lower triangle,
Mm.
those three chakras.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about like, thinking about then for boys, what are some of those early signs of sexual and nervous system dysregulation that we need to, as parents, be aware of in boys, or how can we start teaching boys about that?
Yeah. I would say, that really comes back to the parents and, majority of, I'm not a parent. So, I'm going to speak from how I would parent when I grow up is, just fostering a home environment that allows the parent's central nervous system to really set the tone for children. And, if the parent's central nervous system is calm and relaxed and the parents are in alignment with the seasons, and, when the sun comes down, there's not excess light, white light in the house, and, there's more gravitating towards being tired and getting up before the sun comes up. I'd
Mm.
say that that's the healthiest thing that a child can use for the nervous system and to stay in sync with the planet. And I think that for a lot of men, for a lot of women, when we're out of sync in that, our central nervous system is out of balance. And then in that, we kind of become sympathetic nervous system dominant. And then there's a lot of behaviors that play out from there. I'd say that that's the biggest piece of, of raising healthy boys is to, give them a healthy environment to be able to cultivate that.
Yeah, and I guess then modeling or explaining what to do with anger when that does get triggered. I mean, it happened to me yesterday with my son, who kind of starts going at his sister and allowing him to calm down, helping him calm down, explaining that anger is normal, it's healthy. Because again, his response is, "I shouldn't do that. That there's something wrong," and saying, "No,
Yeah.
anger is a really important emotion. It lives in all of us, and there's a way to use it in a healthy." More
Mm.
regulated way, or what needs to happen when you're in dysregulation to bring yourself back into a calmer place. And we have to do that whilst remaining calm ourselves, which is the hard bit, right? And
Yeah.
not doing what our parents may have done, which is you mustn't, meeting anger with anger.
Yeah. And I guess my question would be to you is that's one conversation to have with your son, but then how do you embody anger in front of him? And it's not the conversations that we have with our children, it's what we do. And for me personally, like, I had to heal a lot of mother stuff in this life. And it wasn't the way that my mother loved me, it was the way that my mother loved herself. And then
Mm.
that's what I learned. So, you can be the best parent in the world and have all of the conversations with your children. But then if your anger and your relationship anger is not the same, and if you're being slightly passive aggressive and you're not doing your rage release techniques and your son is not seeing walk the embodiment, then that's where, that's what we're actually listening. That's what we're learning from. Yeah, there.
Absolutely. And parents, their friends, the media, the stuff they're watching, it's so part of our society, right? That we don't process emotions in a healthy way.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think that that's what you spoke of as well. To the I shouldn't be doing that is where the guilt and shame spiral comes in, and that's the main problem with sexuality. Like, so using porn as a coping strategy, using masturbation as a way to discharge energy from your nervous system is not wrong. It's part of our not self theme. I'm really passionate into human design, and I think that when we have these maladaptive behaviors pop up, it's not so much of this is who we are, and we need to identify with these kind of maladaptive behaviors. They're just like an emotion. They're just a signal that's kind of communicating to us to be like, hey, something's not right here. We just need to change
Mm.
scenery, like a new fishbowl, or we need to get out into the jungle for a week, or we just need to go on a yoga retreat and reset our nervous system. And then, not necessarily shun or shame these particular behaviors that we actually have, because that's only going to take us on a further spiral down. So actually
Mm.
being outside of where we're at and receiving the message, be like, Okay, that's quite odd. I haven't really done that, and this starting to become a pattern. It's not necessarily something I need to fix or I'm not broken, etc. I just need to actually mix things up. I need to change where I'm at. Something's really bothering me or something's out of alignment, and I need to kind of narrow down what that is.
Mm, mm. I guess that a question then is like, why do you think that pornography has become such a kind of powerful global compulsion for many men?
I would say that on the equal front, like vibrators for women are exactly the same. And I would say that they're both sympathetic, like nervous system arousal. For the listeners that are listening out there, sympathetic arousal is kind of what's portrayed in the movies where we grab our partner, there's all this lust, we're really fast to it and there's this passion. And parasympathetic arousal is kind of like this slow, hey, might not necessarily actually be turned on right now, but if you, gave my neck a massage for 5 minutes and, like actually was just present with me and there, then a slower level of arousal and eros can take place. So there's kind of these two different arousals, and the vibrator and the porn are just kind of a reflection of where our collective nervous system is at. And how you do anything is how you do everything. So if we're having sex in a sympathetic, if we're living in a nervous system state of sympathetic, we're going to be having sex there as well. And also our self pleasure is going to be there as well.
Mm, mm, so it's a reflective of the issue that we have in society with dysregulated nervous systems.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
Mm,
the capacity to really come into our body and really slow down in life then will actually translate into our intimacy as well.
that makes so much sense. Um, Yeah, and I wonder whether you could maybe tell listeners a little bit about like some of those freeze response experiences that you may have had in your childhood. So how unresolved emotional responses from childhood really has that impact,
Mm.
in adulthood.
Yeah, totally. I think, if we are in an environment that's having continuous kind of freeze responses, or let's look at it that our HPA access is kind of getting triggered, etc. A freeze response is related to maybe my father is the one that's triggering me, and he's my space of safety, and he's also, for me personally, my father was more intimate than my mother, but then he was also the most aggressive. So then the body becomes quite shocked. It can't like fight, it can't fly because my dad's a lot bigger and a lot stronger. It can't fly because where else am I going to get my actual intimacy from? So then it freezes because it has to have its needs met in some way, and then we're put into quite a predicament. And I think that this is probably the origination of like maybe disorganized attachment style later on in life, where we're kind of anxious and avoidant at the same time. Or I think that highly organized is also an attachment style as well.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so a mechanism to create safety. But in that fight or flight response, what we have is we have a lot of numbness because a lot of our parasympathetic nervous system responses like rest and digest, even pleasure, all these things are turned off and they haven't come back on because of the layers of the freeze response in our childhood that were
Mm,
kind of disassociated from parts of our body. There's numbing, and the coping strategies of how that looks for each individual is going to be different. Some people could have a coping strategy of using excess stimulation to get rid of this nervous energy from a freeze response. Somebody could go to the gym, somebody could become highly successful. And there's so many different ways that like unregulated nervous system that is probably kind of lost touch with part of our HPA axis, part of the thymus gland, part of our
uh,
overall regulation with inside of ourselves is lost. So we're kind of unconsciously trying to regulate ourselves through substances or through behaviors.
and I suppose then as an adolescent, masturbation becomes a very easy place to go to be able to regulate.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And especially with, I can feel it in myself. So, often I won't ejaculate for, 2, 3, 4 weeks, 8 weeks sometimes if I'm setting the intention. And if I can hop down on my phone and be on Instagram and I haven't like circulated my energy in a day or two, even Instagram can be enough of a catalyst to pull me up into my dopamine. I could scroll past an image and then that can be a hook. And it's like, I don't even think that porn is actually the problem these days. It's like social media is the real gateway drug for porn. It's like, as soon as we hop in our phone and we're consuming, even somewhat like erotic images of women, or like women that are, you know, looking beautiful, stunning, radiance. Even that can be enough of a trigger for us to then hop onto porn as well too. So, um, men have a lot of challenges in this life to be able to cultivate a place of connection, and then harness that energy in life too. And I think that's probably the biggest one, is that we don't have great role models in society teaching us how to harness that energy, or an embodiment of that as well too.
And how do you think we manage that with young people? I'm thinking about the whole sort of free from smartphone movement, and what do you think? What are healthier ways that we can deal with this, and how do we have to manage technology in the world that we live in?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I kind of like, am I somebody who's holding on to an ancient way of living and not happy about it? And am I trying to preach something that was applicable 200, 300 years ago? Or is society moving in this way to have less sexual energy and to be more in our mind, to actually create a new form or a new evolution within the planet? Highly possible.
Mm,
As a species, that this is happening for a reason. It's not happening to us, it's happening for us. And there could be some form of evolution that comes through it or not. Um, there could be, a pendulum swing back the other way where we're able to connect to ourselves. But I think, ultimately, how do we just need men in uncles and role models in our community just being the healthy version of themselves.
mm,
Um, that, bringing back work around rites of passages as well too would be quite big. I think that often a lot of the times that I ever went into um, emotional or sexual dysfunction that was from a place of emotional wounding, or my immature little boy. And even as an adult, there was a lot of times where I was kind of like challenged throughout my life because I hadn't been initiated into being a man. And it wasn't until I'd actually taken that internal choice to recognize or realize that I was a man. I feel that once young men can have that initiation into a rite of passage to step into being an adult and kind of really recognizing their role in society that is blueprinted to them from men in their society, is then how we also tackle that issue. And, I can see it's quite prevalent. Like, I've traveled through lots of different countries. My partner is a very beautiful blonde woman at the moment, and I watch the amount of men give her so much attention, and that's attention, and that's sexual energy. That's, them not being in their heart. That's not being them being respectful. And, this issue isn't something that's just in Western worlds. It's in developing countries as well too. And there's not a level of respect for our own bodies and also that of women as well.
So how can we do that? How can we move out of the base chakras into the heart space? Maybe you could talk to listeners a little bit about how to do this. What are some healthier mechanisms?
Yeah. Is this the kind of forum for me to talk a little bit about what happened to me around porn usage, etc.? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, please.
So when I was on a deployment once in Afghanistan, I was rocketed about 270 times in a 6-month period. Um, and during those rocket attacks, there was a level of stimulation going on in my nervous system, which, I wasn't really aware of. I was a soldier, I was very conditioned, closed off. But myself and a lot of the other men there were using porn of a nighttime to basically just switch off and disconnect, which then, after 6 months of being at war, there's probably an element of shame around that because it's a behavior that you're hiding. There's also an element of fear getting mixed. So it's like shame, fear, and sex all getting interwoven, and then kind of like the level of dopamine driven behavior, to the point where I come back from that deployment. I had a fiance at the time, was in a long term relationship, and I couldn't really connect with her sexually after that. And it took me a long time to be able to reconnect in a healthy way sexually post that kind of addiction. And, my dysfunction went beyond porn and like to prostitutes and, drug usage after the military and after I left the military. Um, and then how I really deconditioned myself was doing the work. I signed up to a 12-month somatic sexologist course myself. Yeah, so then I actually joined a school called New Paradigm Intimacy, which is a 12-month somatic sexologist course. And a part of that was a tool called the self pleasure modality. So that was kind of very self intimacy based, self touch. So I was able to actually really regulate my peripheral nervous system. And I think that we have the parasympathetic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, which are part of the central nervous system. Then we also have what's called the peripheral nervous system. And the peripheral nervous system is kind of um, facing outwards to the world and where a lot of our sensory information can come from. And you can imagine that if this peripheral nervous system is quite dysregulated, that your central nervous system is going to be quite dysregulated as well. And then also, you know, 95% of our serotonin actually comes from the peripheral nervous system as well. Um, so this self-touch modality had a lot to do with re-regulating the peripheral nervous system, which was then able to have an impact of the signaling pathways into the body as to what's happening in my reality, whether that be in war or close intimate relationship, that I could actually really start to see reality for what it was. I was in such a heightened state that I didn't want to be in my own body. I didn't want to be connected to my sensory input. And I didn't want to actually feel pleasure or have the capacity to feel pleasure in my body. I only had the capacity to drive pleasure through my mind. So when that eventually happened, I could come back into a state of arousal in my body and pleasure in my body and rewire my pleasure back into my body and back into my nervous system as opposed to being in my mind or being very thought-based driven during sexual pleasure. Yeah.
Incredible. So yeah, bringing it back into the body, which is so much of the work that I do. Working with clients, that things are so cerebral, and we are in the way that we're educated, right? In the way that work and life is run, we're so in our minds and have no idea what's happening in our physical bodies. So it's amazing that you did that year program.
Yeah, I agree. And I actually went on to do further study in that school, so more of an advanced 9-month container as well. And then I had a lot of previous breathwork experience and a previous trauma work. So then I actually went on to become like a male facilitator in that space for 55 women for a 12-month container. And then I think that that led me in even further to realize, oh, okay, you know, we have all these organs inside of us as well too. And, when we go through extreme levels of trauma, our organs can be severely impacted through that as well too. So then
Mm.
that's kind of what the rest of my, I guess I would say, intimacy and sexual journey has also been reconditioning the kidneys and reconditioning my liver and really going deep into my inner alchemy. So then my body can hold as much pleasure and as much life force as well too.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and started having practices. For me, Kundalini is a daily practice to you work using Kriya on particular organs or whatever it is that I'm wanting to process or work through myself. And yeah, I'm thinking of doing a sacred sexuality program, which I'll probably put up on my website, that will go through, working introduction to sacred sexuality, working through the sacral chakra, navel chakra, heart center, maybe some Venus Kriyas, allowing people to have even just small nuggets of things that they can include in a daily practice. As you mentioned, breath work, doing half an hour of breath of fire every day is so powerful.
Yeah, I did what, 8 minutes of breath of fire this morning. I'm a Kundalini teacher as well, so
Yeah.
Satnam. And
Satnam.
yeah, I think that also on the topic of psychedelics, these are really important. There's like Eros and Kundalini are two psychedelic energies that really exist in our body. And I feel like for anyone works in psychedelics, and I'm not speaking about traditional natives that kind of have this cultural connection to land and medicine. But I think in the Western world, until we really understand our own sexuality and understand the power of psychedelic energies that live within inside of our own consciousness, and we've used these to like really tear down our own psyche, that possibly there could be further work for us to do before we step into the psychedelic facilitation space as well.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I wanted to come back to a piece you mentioned about shame. What advice do you give, or, for men that really feel ashamed at even looking at this narrative, or seeing masturbation as potentially a coping mechanism? and they don't know how to, and they're not sure if they want to break the cycle.
Mhm. Yeah.
What would you
Hey, starts with the choice, everything
mm,
is our choice, everything is our own desire. And also, we don't have to, I guess, um, absorb the burden to think that it's our responsibility to move through that by ourselves. There's so many people that exist on the planet right now that can actually help you with that when you set the right intention and want to move towards it. So, setting the intention to be like, I want to work on this. I want to get rid of this. I want to get rid of shame. That's it. As soon as you speak those words aloud and that is your desire and you show up and move towards that with a little bit of effort, then things will unfold and pieces will
mm,
you. It can be as simple as getting an online men's group, and actually bringing your stuff to the men's group, which is very similar to like say an AA container where there's full, everything's anonymous. You can bring whatever it is and you can speak into, any kind of dysfunction, any kind of experience. There's also a lot of, somatic practitioners like myself these days that are doing a lot of work. And also, I think necessarily the work to heal yourself of shame can actually be a little bit beyond um, like needing to do that work. It could be Kundalini. It could be
mm,
actually you just going to a yoga center and following a traditional Kundalini path, which is really going to free you of your inner karma, your inner contractions, your inner beings, bring you into a state of, high vitality. And through that, then the healthy sexuality will unfold.
mm,
The lack of healthy sexuality is what I said before. It's like a byproduct of other things in your life that aren't actually really taking place. So if we actually use like Kundalini or um, a yoga based tool or something that has a lot of structure, we can then actually move away from our sexual dysfunction in that healing the shame.
mm. And I'm thinking, Matthew, even about the people that don't see it as shame
Hmm.
and don't acknowledge shame.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing, like
Mm,
shame, like one of the deepest emotions to actually handle. And a lot of people out there can actually, um, I'd say that the end path ends up very similar to what you're speaking to. So, if we're seeing something as too bad, people are going to have the dualistic experience of seeing things as not bad, and if we're highly adverse to shame, there's going to be people out there that aren't adverse to shame. And then a lot of people that aren't adverse to shame is because they don't actually have the capacity to hold that in the nervous system. And if we're looking at a body that's really dysfunctional and their central nervous system is quite kaput, they're going to have a lot of sympathetic dominance. And in
mm,
that, there's going to have not a lot of parasympathetic capacity. So in that, they don't even have the ability to feel grief or, certain levels of emotion. So of course, they're not going to have the capacity to be able to feel shame. Shame is kind of like something that we are working towards at a certain point in the path of dysfunction that can actually come back online for us and that we can process it and heal it.
mm.
And there needs to be a certain level of capacity or bandwidth to actually go there to feel that in our body. We're going to avoid
Absolutely,
that.
yeah. And I'm thinking about, people where, if you're doing kind of a genital heart meditation, just the like struggle to feel the heart, struggle to
Mhm.
feel the heart or the energy or anything. It's almost like this is my thinking mind and these are my genitals and I'm turned on and I want to have sex, but the nuances of anything in between, that
Mm.
subtlety can be really hard for people to connect to.
I agree, and it's one I can really relate with. And I used to tell clients that connecting back to the heart again is just like going to the gym. You can lift weights and train your bicep, and if you've disconnected from your heart, like a lot of soldiers do, a lot of men do, it just takes time and effort. It's just continual effort, awareness, attention, these kind of things, to actually really connect back to those things. I'd
Mm,
say I've gone from not being able to feel grief to, total emotional, cardboard box I was, all the
mm,
way up. I can cry at a drop of a hat these days. I think at the start of Scorpio season, maybe a week and a half ago, I cried 4 days in a row. And I was really
mm,
having a piece of feeling unlovable come up for me in my nervous system. Um, and nothing to fix, nothing's broken, nothing's wrong, just allowing life to move through me and allowing the
yeah.
emotions to move through me and not attaching too strongly to them. And allowing them to open me up more. And I'd say that,
Mm,
at the end of those 4 days, I was in heaven, and I was feeling so much bliss and openness in my heart and, welcome life meeting me in those ways now.
mm, mm. So you mentioned in one of the articles about semen retention. I wondered if you could tell listeners a little bit about that, so that I can understand what that means and maybe the different types of orgasm that men can experience. In my experience, that there's sort of 99% of men talk about kind of ejaculatory orgasm, and that's it, that there isn't anything beyond that. So I wonder whether maybe we could talk a bit about that
Yeah,
side.
absolutely. I kind of like to call it like sexual direction. So it's not about like abstaining. It's like, using your sexual energy for direction in life. And that really, they're kind of correlated. So if we don't have direction in life, our capacity to actually hold that much sexual energy is going to be challenged. When we hold that much sexual energy within inside of ourselves, life can become pretty amazing. Things can move quite quickly. We can quite become magnetic. So also we want to make sure that we're heading in the right direction in life. And then also, moving in the right direction, having goals and something to work towards actually is kind of like a co-creation, between us, the universe, that our boundaries and our capacity to hold ourselves in a certain ways comes from what we're calling in and what we're desiring. So, if that we're going to, just abstain from ejaculating and cultivate all of this sexual energy and not be using it for good or not walking a certain path in life, we're not going to get there. It's kind of that's one, your will versus the will of, divinity. And then we kind of have these two wills functioning side by side. So, there is a deeper understanding between ourselves and how life works that can be obtained through semen retention. And I'd say
Mhm.
a really big part of that is like the lower triangle that you spoke of when building this energy up. So if we think about sexual energy at the sacral and we're building the water up, the water element up, then what we can actually do is like start to press on the other chakras. So we have our base chakra, which is a lot of our own personal needs and our safety and core relating pieces live in the base. And then we might have power dynamics and shame and our relationships with others as well too in the stomach, in the solar plexus. So as we build this sexual energy up, basically, it's gonna touch all of the places where we're not developed or where we're not evolved yet with inside of our lower triangle to build it up. And that direction in life that I was speaking about is the direction of the sexual energy moving up. But
Mm,
that's the heart is leading us towards something inside of life that is community driven or our partner. And when we're unfolding these parts of the lower triangle with inside of ourselves, it can be quite an experience. We're talking about choosing to evolve our consciousness from, our primitive template up into a higher state of being, which becomes quite an spiritual experience. Uh, so, semen retention is no joke. And it's like
mm,
something that, I'm only just getting started on. And I think I've been doing it for probably 7 years. Uh, and it's a lifelong relationship, I'd say, that I will just continue to work with and build with. And yeah, to go beyond that, there's so many different forms of pleasure that can be experienced in the body.
mm.
Um, there's the, yeah,
Yeah, just a quick question. Are you practicing kind of non-ejaculatory orgasm within your kind of
yep. So
personal.
yeah, definitely a possibility, and definitely something that I do by
Mhm.
myself.
Mm.
But then also, I'm experiencing. I have this kind of fun little app that I created, this little spin wheel. So it's just like a little kind of pokey wheel, like you've just spun a wheel at the fair. And that's my morning practice at the moment. And I have all of these like different activities on this wheel, and it's got a really good dopamine kind of noise, like it then in there, like you've won something and you get the opportunity to go do this like fun morning practice. But I've noticed that a lot of the mornings it's actually giving me self-pleasure. And that my self-pleasure has actually really gone up. And then my partner's here in Bali with me as well. So then we're quite intimate quite often. And then so yeah, I think that um non-ejaculation based orgasm is not something that's like really um that I'm desiring. I think that sometimes I can if I'm moving that way inclined where I'm just really desiring the orgasm, then, I'm kind of actually in a sympathetic nervous system state. And it's not so much about desiring the orgasm, it's more around like holding that energy. And there can even be like a slight amount of, I'd say discharge in not ejaculating through that as well too. So yeah, I'm open to both. They're both achievable. And it's kind of like I'm not attached to either. It's just kind of more of what season I'm in, where I'm at in life, and how
Mm,
and what I want to move towards. Yeah.
And what, if listeners are interested, what first steps would you recommend for men that are curious to
Go
learn
practice
more?
yoga. It's great with the lock system, so the root lock. So, pulling up on the perineum point is, really great tool for you to be able to learn how to have some kind of muscle control and some kind of ability to be able to contract. And then that's ultimately kind of what um orgasm or having an orgasm without you ejaculating is you using muscle control within inside of yourself to stop yourself from having semen come out. So that and breath as well too. Um, and yeah, I'd say that guys, if you're out there, once again, set the intention that that's kind of what you want to do and that's how you want to show up, and and then that's the first thing. That's always the first thing. Set the intention, want to connect to your
Mm,
body. Find a like-minded community where you can connect with other people in person as well.
mm,
Um, Hop on Instagram and find the people that you align with, find the people that resonate with you. Uh, there are so many different spaces where you can actually like learn that information, connect with that. I think for men out there, there's an organization that I studied in, and I'm still a teacher in that school. It's called New Paradigm Intimacy. They actually just had like a 7-day, sorry, I'm in Bali, and there's a mozzie here. We had a 7-day free self-pleasure event for men, men only. So you can check out New Paradigm Intimacy. Maybe that might be a recording.
mm,
Um, Reach out to me personally as well. Um, I'd say also what's your intention as well, getting clear on what your intention is. But I think that the sexuality space for men is kind of one of the biggest untouched spaces, especially in the self-development industry. I see a lot of men online, on the internet telling me how much of a guru they are and that they've got all the information, they've got all the wisdom, and that they're a life coach and they're going to change my life. And they haven't even touched their sexuality, and
mm,
they haven't looked at it or acknowledged it, and they don't even know themselves. They
uh,
don't even know the true themselves. And, I think that as a society, we really need to look at this. We need to do the work. Yeah.
Absolutely. But before we move on, I'm just thinking, what about the men that would be skeptical about semen retention? Like, to tell us, what would you say
I
to
would
them?
say, the NFL quarterbacks, Bruce Lee, fighters, AFL football players, anyone that is anything in sport is not ejaculating the night before game. And people like Bruce Lee, etc., is massively cultivating chi within inside of their body. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to think that if you're excreting liquids from your body that can give birth to a human, that if you continually do that over and over and over, multiple times a day, you're basically giving all of your life force away. The capacity to actually, give birth is huge.
Mm,
And I think that also the sensations that are arising in men's bodies when that is happening is kind of actually, no, like, I've heard men speak into spaces of feeling guilt or feeling shame, um, and they've actually moved into ejaculating or feeling certain sensations. I don't think that that's actually guilt or shame. It's actually more your body being like, bro, it's sending you a signal that this is not
mm,
good. This is actually bad you, and you're interpreting that as shame, or you're interpreting that as a social construct of something I shouldn't be doing. But that's your body sending you messages to be like, I'm not happy about this.
mm. Yeah, I'm just thinking as you're talking there, how important is this? The impact that this has on healthy relationships, stronger families, stronger communities, a safer world. Like it feels massive to me. I just wondered if you could speak of the importance of
Yeah.
this work.
And I think I hadn't done, a couple of months semen retention. I'd probably only been going to 2 weeks and, I was probably at the bare minimum in my new relationship. So, I entered into a new relationship. I was still only ejaculating once every 2 weeks, but it got to a point where I was feeling a bit declined.
Mm.
And even that ejaculating once every 2 weeks, which is like considered the healthy point,
Mm.
wasn't really it for me. So then I actually signed up to a men's container and did like a 30-day challenge with another bunch of men. And then I doubled it and I went 60 days. And I could notice in the 60 days just how much more presence I had, how much more clearer my mind was, how much more productive I was, how much more arousal I even had on top of not ejaculating, every 2 weeks for my partner. Then what our love making went to, the capacity for you to be able to make love and hold 60 days worth of semen inside of your body is such an experience in itself that should be experienced because it is like such a visceral, um, all encompassing, like pleasurable, like, psychedelic experience to be breathing and like moving this energy through your body and have to move. So you're like, otherwise you're
Mm.
about to release. So that in itself builds trust with your partner, builds trust with yourself. You get to understand your own willpower and not entering into sex too fast. How you approach anything is going to set the trajectory of it as well, too. So, you get to learn about yourself. You get to learn about new ways of meeting sexuality as well, too. So, hugely important for all facets of our life as men. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds extremely powerful.
Yeah.
Mm.
I agree. And,
Mm.
the last time I went to Peru, the last time I drank ayahuasca in Peru. It was the second time I've ever drank an ayahuasca, and my experience within that psychedelic was quite neutral, very pleasurable, a lot of positivity, not a lot of ass kicking, not a lot of, contraction or anything. And I base that because, I learned how to love myself. I learned intimacy for myself. I learned self touch. I, went through all of these tools of using somatics and getting to know myself and getting to understand myself and holding myself accountable and being a better person that, psychedelics didn't actually have that much to show me.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then maybe you could speak of your ongoing, like, process of healing sexuality. What does that look like, and how has it evolved over time?
Yeah, I'd say that, really just comes back to really, I guess, for me personally, where I'm expanding in my sexual, um, world these days is, just really an understanding my partner, my partner's heart, her body during intimacy, my body during intimacy, and then, how can we set a space or, move down a path that allows us to connect to psychedelic like experiences through sex and through intimacy.
Mm.
I think that there is the full potential for us to, merge with, the void or, certain psychedelics experiences that we may have through plants, etc., through sex as well too. And through that, what we might call union or the balancing the masculine and feminine energy. So, that's something that I'm just working towards and moving towards, and that's healing in itself because every time I have one of those experiences takes me further to, further to, divinity. Yeah,
Mm, mm. Yeah, and I'm thinking about psychedelics and, like, how we might start to break down the kind of culture, that makes it difficult for men to discuss issues of sexuality or to be able to talk about masturbation in this way. Move out of that root, those root chakras.
totally, yeah, and, very important. I often, like, offer normally, like, a week-long no masturbation challenge whenever I do any kind of men's work events, so, um, if I do, like, a weekend retreat or, like, a workshop, then, yeah, I'll encourage, like, that we all get into a WhatsApp afterwards, and then we do, like, a week-long, no porn, and
Mm.
semen. So, places do exist out there. There are spaces where people are kinda offering this work and, yeah, we can really get to know ourselves, and that's all it is, like, um, you know, I don't know all the answers, I'm just
Mm.
on interpretation of life. There's no dogma, there's no me telling you how to live or what to do. I just have my own personal experience, my own lived experience. And, what I would like to do is empower other men to have their own lived experience, to master their own body, to master their own tools and be able to walk their own walk. Yeah.
Mm. And maybe you could talk a little bit about microdosing, how you bring microdosing into this.
Yeah.
Um,
I feel like I saw a lot of shortcomings in the microdosing industry, or but there probably wasn't really much of an industry within Australia. There was basically, nearly shame as well too, where microdosing would kind of be happening in back rooms, or friends
Mm.
would be doing it, but they wouldn't be telling all their friends. They would just tell their bestie, or and people were having these really kind of amazing experiences, or not so amazing experiences, and it was kind of like very unspoken. If somebody gave you the microdosing, it's highly likely that you could take too much on your first experience, or, not enough. And there didn't seem to be kind of like very embodied leaders in that space that were holding a lot of knowledge. Most people that were holding the knowledge in those spaces were kind of like more psychedelic people that weren't embodied, that weren't integrated, that, were actually stuck in possibly like a psychedelic loop where they were using that as a relief system. So I thought that, what I really desired was to, wow, there's such a huge potential in psychedelics at the moment in the world. Wouldn't it be wild if I could, slightly put all my energy into this like emerging field for a while to slightly change the course of this? So I guess that's where the work and what I created was a microdosing facilitator training that really looked at trauma in the body, understanding that from a microdosing perspective. Also, how do we care for the people in our community? How do we ask them about medical contradictions? How do we ask them about how they're feeling, how resourced they are in their somatic body? How do we then prepare them in case, they have a visceral emotion come up during their microdosing experience as well? So, that's, where I've been putting a lot of my time and attention towards, to basically training leaders within the communities of Australia that really want to be able to hold that knowledge and hold that space, that may have had like a very powerful experience in microdosing themselves. And then, there's a lot of people that are connecting people with microdosing, but it isn't really coming from a safe space. So, that's
mm.
what we really try to do, is like take a lot of the harm reduction out of it, and then teach people how to have an even better experience as well.
That's amazing work that you're doing, Matthew. Thank you so much for bringing that to the community. I just wondered whether you could tell listeners a little bit more about the impact of microdosing on the nervous system, seeing as we've been kind of talking a lot about that. Like what the balance between, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system with microdosing.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like, microdosing is actually more of the peripheral nervous system. And that, yes, there is the capacity to be able to regulate the central nervous system through the behavioral changes that we can have, and the actual behavioral changes, and I guess, how I see microdosing is that we take the mushroom, and there's a kind of like a form of satiation that happens. So
Mm.
when we're a baby and we're on the boob and we drink the milk, and then, we receive the correct messages from our stomach that we're full, and then we delatch and come off the boob, and then we start to feel pleasurable and we feel satiated, which is like, what I believe the byproduct of serotonin and these kind of messaging signals that's happening within the brain. So when we start to take microdosing as adults, what can really happen is that we can actually have like a top down messaging signal that's happening to say, hey, all my needs are met and I feel safe. And as humans these days, we don't really get that. We don't really have this kind of satiated, you're safe, you've just had a feed of the boob and everything's going well for yourself. And in that, we don't have any neuroplasticity. So the neuroplasticity comes from the satiation that we're feeling from the serotonin that's being released. And then from that, the mushrooms are also working their magic as well. If they kind of, I nearly see them as like an adaptogen. If you're too much in your head, you'll come into your body. If you're too much in your body, you'll come more into your head. And there's this beautiful alchemy that's happening through that. But I think that that also really has a lot to do with the signaling pathways in the serotonin that have been closed down, or particularly like the HTP2A receptors that have been conditioned or corrupted. Um, so for the listeners that aren't aware out there, when we consume psilocybin, it goes into the liver, gets converted into psilocin, and then it can work on key serotonin receptors in the brain that have a lot to do with stress. And a lot of trauma can shape these particular receptors. So 5-HT2A receptors are basically impacted through trauma. So the psilocybin can actually cross the blood-brain barrier, work with these receptors within the brain, actually go and change part of our DNA. So, once these receptors change, our DNA changes at the trauma. It can basically, resolve the brain, resolve the trauma. But that's only happening at the kind of like the top-down layer that I spoke of. So then we're going to have basically maybe patterns or trauma within inside of our body that are sending messages up to the brain to say, I'm not safe and my needs aren't met. So then what we
Mm,
want to do in this state of neuroplasticity is kind of like drive our behaviors like a slingshot to then feel safe and to feel like our needs are met in our body, and use this amazing opportunity that microdosing presents ourselves to anchor in like a kundalini practice or a meditation practice or a self-touch practice, um, and feel that microdosing with a central nervous system is like really, really amazing. I'd say that, probably what I'm seeing now in my field is that you want a person to have a balanced central nervous system as well too before they go into microdosing. So maybe something like high dose chamomile tea or blue lotus of a nighttime that is giving you the GABA to then down regulate, which is then going to bring you out of that sympathetic space, is then also going to allow the microdosing to work even more magic. If you're really stuck in the central nervous system state and you can't really down regulate, a lot of serotonin isn't necessarily going to be the be all end all for that. We want to kind of like get GABA moving and be able to down regulate as well too. So yeah, I love it. I'm
mm,
using a lot of ChatGPT these days, which feels really exciting to be able to bring the emerging technology into this space and, training the facilitators on how to use this for medical contradictions. I'm not a doctor. I'm not pretending to be. I think that that's actually one of my strengths in this space is that I'm not a doctor. This is unregulated, that I can actually bring who I am and my magic gifts to. We don't need another doctor system put around this.
mm,
That's dangerous and slows things down. And yes, it's focused on harm reduction, and so am I. And I think that, using ChatGPT to actually find out what medicines the person's on, how they're functioning, what they're doing. You can actually really even ask ChatGPT if there is any kind of medical contradiction known with that medicine and psilocybin. I even had a client reach out to me during the week the other day who had a mum who wanted to do psilocybin, and she was on a um a restless leg medication, but that restless leg medication was actually like a Parkinson's dopamine antagonist.
mm,
So you say to your clients, hey, what you think you're taking prescribed to you by a doctor is actually something totally different. And, ChatGPT is a really amazing resource these days to be able to give us that information. And I'm very much about in the microdosing spaces giving that person their power back. I'm not another person who's here to give you another protocol and to give you another fix.
mm,
I point you in the right direction for you to become self-empowered, to understand what you're on and what your medicines are on, for you to go do your research, and then together for us to co-create a solution for you that you're driving, that you're in charge of, which is really going to bring the healing to, your body and your nervous system. If you think
mm,
microdosing is just going to be another crutch for yourself, where you're gonna hop onto another protocol and outsource your power again, you're gonna
mm.
miss out and you're not gonna heal. So, yeah, there's a few things that I'm very, very passionate about in that space.
So it's a kind of collaborative process with the client. I mean, what is your recommended protocol? Do you have a, or is it not set? Is it very much client
Yeah,
dependent?
say my recommended protocol is more, substance-based, so it's actually with bee pollen, like stacked with bee pollen. Bee pollen actually has B3 and niacin in it, but basically has a lot of bees in it. It's, the only plant-based B12. I've seen the B vitamins as really highly functioning in the brain. If you go see a good naturopath and you're depressed, they're probably going to give you a multi B vitamin that could be absorbed. And I think the bee pollen is a really amazing product for depression and for the brain. It also has the capacity to um, has neurodetoxins in it, so it can actually get rid of toxins within the brain. It's flora and fauna for the gut, so then it brings the mind body connection in. So it's like an
Mm,
absolute superfood for the mind body connection. And then bringing the psilocybin in with that. And then as far as a protocol goes, it really depends on, who a human is and where they're at. I'd say, like, let's throw this one protocol fits all in the bin, and say, hey, have you ever fallen off a horse? Have you ever had concussion? Have you ever had head injuries? Have you ever been in a domestic violence situation? Do your family members or mum have a
mm,
prolonged history of never feeling anxiety in their whole entire life? And these are kind of the critical questions that are going to give someone an adverse microdosing experience. And kind of once we tick those like high risk factors off, then I'm an advocate for actually using a self scanning method to
mm,
determine protocol and actually really saying, okay, I felt XYZ in my body. This is my limit. This is my window of tolerance. We're
mm,
teaching this is your window of tolerance. This is your past history. This is your mind. This is your emotional body. This is your nervous system. This is your physical body. Let's take a look at them for a couple minutes in the morning and then, do a little journal and say, am I available for microdosing this morning? So it really comes
mm,
back to a level of self empowerment, a level of self discernment, and really strengthening our capacity to know where we're at, which is, PTSD or complex PTSD. We've lost these like abilities to just be in tune with our body, our nervous system. And when we're strengthening that as part of our morning practice and in part of our regime to actually microdose, we're coming back into the body even more. And then we're using that
mm.
as to leverage what our decision making is through psilocybin as well.
Absolutely amazing work you're doing, Matthew. You know what I'm just thinking is as we're coming to an ending, I could talk to you all day. Um, what advice would you give to men who feel isolated and disconnected and don't really know where to start on healing sexual dysfunction or their own kind of wider healing journey?
I'd probably say, track your podcast. So, Psychedelic Couch podcast would be a great place to start. And podcasts are amazing places to start. Find the topics that you're passionate about or what
Mm,
lights you up, what's calling your soul. There's certain things that we listen to that, like, we might get really triggered or really lit up by. Whoever really triggers you or whoever really
mm,
lights you up, follow that path. Like, start to inquire.
mm,
I'd say once a month, set some goals for yourself and just, determine what you want, choose it and this is the direction I'm heading in, kind of that sexual direction piece. This is what I want to achieve at the end in this month. And then allow your healing to be a co-creation as well too. Don't just drive everything from the mind. Set a list of goals that you want to achieve over the month. See which ones arrive to you, which ones don't. If one doesn't come,
mm,
okay, maybe you can just move on to the next one. Or if you really want to push that one, see what happens. But setting a list of goals for overall improvement each month
mm,
and moving towards them is a really good foundation for you to be able to start doing the work. And
mm.
those behaviors mightn't necessarily be you jumping straight into working on your sexuality. It could just be you changing your diet. The amount of salt, sugar, this is a whole podcast in itself, and stimulations that exist in diet these days are always probably going to give us strong cause and effects in our sexuality as well.
Yep.
Um, so it doesn't necessarily have to take the shape that we think that it needs to in our mind. We just need to choose that health and then move in the direction that life is taking us and surrender into that to be able to receive as well.
Yeah, and maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, the impact of our diet.
Yeah, I'd say that like we're in a stimulation crisis. Coffee, sugar, salt, all of these things are basically lighting up our brain so much. We have different dopamine receptors. So we have receptors one, two, three, four. One and two are like the excitatory pathway. Three and four are the return pathway. So when the little baby is actually on the boob drinking the milk, it's the return path of I'm full, and the actually, communicating back to the body to actually feel satiated. So, we when we make a mistake, it's the emotions that we're feeling in the return path of three and four that are actually teaching us to learn. So when we're hardwired in these dopamine one and two receptors, and we're kind of only in excitatory pathways, our capacity to learn or our capacity to stop is really nullified. And a really good example of that is like coffee. Each day we wake up, we're extremely tired. We basically jump into the excitatory pathways of one and two through coffee, and we forget that we're tired. And the pathways of we're tired coming through three and four get neglected, and we're basically creating this, and then we need more and more and more excitatory pathways to turn off from. So the end result of that could be porn. So what we really need to do is to come back into the body to be able to decondition these pathways. Cold showers is a good mechanism for doing something that feels good, but feels good in our body but doesn't feel good in our mind.
Yeah.
And having and cultivating more awareness around that. We need to listen to the body. We need to slow down, and we want to kind of really strengthen that communication of our feedback loops so we can make change and make the correct change. And when we're in too much stimulation, that is a struggle.
Mm. And you talk about in one of your articles the collective benefits of healing male sexuality on a global scale. How do you envisage a world where more men have reconnected, with their bodies, have healed these patterns, are in a more regulated state?
Yeah, I see like untapped potential for men and women on the planet. I feel like when there's a healthy man, there's 40 healthy women. And that's not through sexual intimacy. That's just like a healthy man's capacity to hold a village, and he can hold your 40 people. And the amount of women that have come into my life, I'm far from perfect, but have come into my life and had some kind of healing through like healthy masculinity has been quite profound and quite beautiful to receive. And I think that healthy men are really needed to be able to repair some of the lack of safety and things that have happened to women in this community. And so much of the hypervigilance and, hyper protection mechanisms that we're seeing in women these days can, start to switch off. And as a collective and as a community, we can actually start to bring women back into their power. And when
Mm,
women are in their power, like we have untapped potential. So, it's not so much about having a world of healthy men, it's about having a world of healthy witches that are all connected to their womb and, actually,
mm.
moving in synchronicity with the planet again. And I think, I've got goosebumps in sharing that.
Yeah,
Uh,
and
yeah,
me.
yeah. So,
Yeah, like
that's where the healthy world comes from.
absolutely, and healthy leaders and a healthy family, it just impacts everything, right? What would you most like to convey to listeners about the importance of this for themselves, for their communities, for their
I would say
relationships?
you really probably don't know life until you've tried this.
Mm,
And it would be a shame for you to live, your whole entire life and get to the end of life and start to have a psychedelic, otherworldly experience when so many of them exist in this moment, like right now. It's like you don't have to wait to pass over to get to heaven. Heaven exists in every day, and it exists in the body and exists through alchemizing this earthly struggle into higher states of consciousness and being able to like walk in that and embody that. And, why would you not want to experience that? We've come
mm.
here in this life, in this planet to be able to, you know, um, have infinite possibilities and, go claim that.
That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Matthew. What question have I not asked that you wish I'd asked?
That's it. Yeah, no, I've no desire here to, push a certain message or anything. And I've just really loved being on the podcast and, yeah, greatly appreciative that you're holding this space and opening these conversations and inviting people like myself to be on here. And, amazing. Psychedelics. We just saw Trump get in, who's apparently Kennedy is going to push for different psychedelic laws.
Mm,
So no more like hard line around psychedelics. And I'm part of a psychedelic organization in Australia called Heroic Hearts, which is veteran organization that sends veterans to the Amazon to do medicine with traditional keepers. And yeah, I'd say that some exciting times for the planet when psychedelics come online, and there's huge potential for healing there. Yeah.
mm. Oh, Matthew, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time and I've learned so much and I'm sure my listeners have as well. So really thank you very, very much.
Welcome. Feel free to reach out on Instagram and give me a follow on matthewbruce.official. And yeah, I'd love to chat, or if you have any specific questions, I'm more than happy. I have heaps of time. I'm the least busiest person in the world these days, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you have.
Amazing. We'll put all your contact details in the show notes.
Amazing. All right. Thank
Awesome.
you.
You've been listening to the Psychedelic Couch. For more episodes, please follow me on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts, and find me on Instagram at the Psychedelic Couch and at Clare Faulkner Therapy, where I will be keeping you up to date on the latest episodes and information surrounding all things therapy, psychedelics, and expanded states.